Real Estate Show. I'm Justin Stoddard. Oh my goodness, I am fired up, thrilled, excited. Those are a lot of adjectives right there about how I'm feeling about this episode and really what this content has done for me in my life. And I'm thrilled to have today's guest. Before I introduce him, let me just reiterate the purpose of this show is that when we start to think bigger, we begin to act differently. And as we act differently, our businesses grow. And as our businesses grow, the options in our life and the impact that we can have in the world also grow. And that's my passion, is to help inspire people that want to impact the world in greater ways. So I'm thrilled and want to thank today's guest, Geoff Woods, Vice President of The One Thing, for being with us today. Geoff, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. For those that don't know Geoff and your story, in fact, let me back up by just saying the book, The One Thing. If you haven't read it, your head's probably been in the sand. It's been a bestseller for a long, long time on all the major platforms, right? New York Times, USA Today, Amazon, on and on and on. It has been a remarkable catalyst for a lot of people to change the way they look at things. Geoff, how did you find out about The One Thing?
Justin, I was in medical device sales at the time, and I remember it was our national sales meeting. I walked into this big ballroom. We probably had 1,500 people at the meeting, so a lot of chairs, and on every single chair was a copy of The One Thing. And I remember picking up the book and looking at it and go, oh, this is cool. And then out on stage walked Jay Papasan, who co-authored The One Thing with Gary Keller. And for the next hour, he proceeded to just blow my mind. And I remember, Justin, I was at this point in my life where I was ready to make a change. In medical device sales, had enjoyed a great living and great quality of life, but I was lacking fulfillment. And prior to this national sales meeting, two things happened that really forced me to make a change. And the first was a colleague of mine had a stroke when he was 35. Wow. And I remember my wife and I had just bought a house in Orange County. We just had our first child, and she made the decision to become a stay-at-home mom. And my colleague has this stroke. And I remember thinking, Justin, wow, if that happened to me, what happens to my family?
Jeez.
And that really rocked me. And then a few weeks later, my company had to make a change to our commission structure to remain competitive in the marketplace. And as a result, I lost 40% of my income. And when you take those two things back to back, all of a sudden I had a lot of pain in my life that made me realize I've actually got to take control of my future. And I heard this Jim Rohn quote that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I remember looking at my 5 and feeling a lot of gratitude because they were great friends, but they weren't actually already where I wanted to be. And so I was hunting mentors. And here's Jay on stage blowing my mind. And I'm going, oh, I got to get into a relationship with this guy. But then all the limiting beliefs started to set in, like, what could I say to him that would make him interested in me? What could I give him that would make it worth his time? And when he came off stage, I just realized now's the time. I got to go. I got to talk to him. And I basically sprinted down the side of the hall. I wanted to be the first guy to talk to him. And I basically tackled him and asked to interview him for a podcast I was hosting at the time called The Mentee. And I just kept following up with him, asking what he and Gary were focusing on. And every single time I asked, he had an answer, whether it was looking for more exposure for the book. He said that a bunch of times. And the third time I followed up and asked, after having delivered each time he had a request, he said that he and Gary were looking for a CEO for a publishing company. And I remember thinking, wow, I knew 3 people that were publishing CEOs that might be a great fit. And I offered to make an introduction. He said, that'd be great. And I said, well, before I do that, why don't we talk so you can tell me who you're looking for so I make the right intro? And when we got on the phone, Justin, he really surprised me because the person he described was not anybody in my network. He described me. And I threw my name in the hat, and you fast forward, November 1st, 2015, I moved my family from Southern California to Austin, Texas. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been turning the book into a company that changes the way people view time.
Really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that story. I've heard bits and pieces of it, but not the whole story. I mean, a couple of things that really stand out to me, Geoff, that I would hope that the audience would maybe get from this, at least that I'm getting from it, right? Is that in fact, one of my mentors teaches that you don't have to be like super courageous all the time, but there's points in your life where you have to be like 10 seconds of absolute courage. And for you, it sounds like it was that, like, I need to go talk to this man, like that, what he's speaking and impact he's having on the world. That's kind of what I like. That's somebody who I need to know. And it probably took a lot of guts, didn't it? To like say, I'm going to go introduce myself. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember when I was going down the road to surrounding myself with people who were light years ahead of me, and all the limiting beliefs that pop up when you want to approach these people. But the truth is, you got to approach. And I remember I've asked several of my mentors, why the heck are you even talking to me? And one guy who was on the founding team of Priceline.com, I remember him saying to me, because at one point in time, I was in your shoes, and there was somebody who reached back, grabbed my hand, and helped pull me forward. And they didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for me to wash their car. All they asked is one day I pay it forward. And this guy was now in a position where he was wealthier than he could ever imagine, had everything that he could possibly want. His life was now about impact, and he wanted to help the next generation of entrepreneurs. So it was in that moment that I realized that when it comes to the mentor-mentee relationship, the mentee actually has more power than the mentor. Because while the mentee thinks, oh, I'm getting so much value from this person who's pouring into me, you're actually giving more value to them because you're giving them a sense of purpose.
Wow. Super interesting. I found that when you really want something, and kind of going back to another point that you made earlier, is like you recognize at one point that I'm not exactly where I want to be, and this path that I'm on might not get me there, right? Like I have a brother-in-law actually who's in medical device sales, so I know very firsthand, kind of vicariously through him, watching what happens to that world, right? As soon as you make a certain amount of money, which is like, yes, this is where I want to be, they're like, no, you can't make that much.
Yeah, they change your territory. They switch the comp plan up. It just, totally. it always, yeah.
And I think, the difference between like with what you've done is you said, look, this is not the path I want to be on long-term. I'm going to, I have to meet different people. I have to get to know other people. For you at the time, that was your one thing, wasn't it? It was. These 5 people, this path that I'm on is not the right one to get me ultimately to where I want to be. And I have to change, like my 5 people have to change.
You nailed it, Justin. It was so clear to me that if I wanted to change my circumstances, I had to change my network. And my one thing was surrounding myself with people who were where I wanted to be.
It is interesting how oftentimes in our minds we play it off that people, because they've had great success, that they're completely unreachable. I found that not to be true, even through this show, is that people successful like you, right? Ultimately, people, they want to give back and contribute. Like you've said, they want to have purpose because somebody at one point helped them get to that next level, right?
That's right. That's right.
And I think you can sense in people when you're with somebody who has a fire burning within them, that they want to contribute in bigger ways, that they want to impact the world in bigger ways, that like you kind of are compelled to want to help that person. It's like, I can see you want it. And that if I give you help, you're going to do something with it.
That's right.
And so allow me to open a door for you. Right.
That's right.
So let's talk about one topic that I typically bring up at the beginning, but I'm going to go back there. You've got a beautiful little family. They're demonstrated on Facebook. The one thing about being a dad, let me ask it this way. The one thing that you love most about being a family man, and what's one thing that you've found to really show up big in that space?
Sure. I think the thing I love most about being a parent is, I mentioned this in the mentor-mentee relationship. Every single one of us is at some point in time in our life going to want to leave a legacy. We're going to be looking for a sense of purpose, and to have kids that you've played a part in creating, and to realize how much they are a reflection of you, to see what they pick up, to realize that you can shape and mold this person like a piece of clay is so cool. And I'll give you an example. My daughter, Daphne, when she was 4 or 5, I had her go on her first 66-day challenge, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it takes on average 66 days to form a habit. And in the one thing, we have this model called a 66-day challenge, where you isolate or identify the one thing you want to turn into a habit, and you do it every day for on average 66 days. And for me to help her understand, like to sit her down and to say, Daphne, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. For a 5-year-old to grasp that concept, holy crap.
Yeah.
And then to help her identify her one thing, and to actually have her go through a process where she creates a habit around that. My gosh, what does that look like over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I can't even comprehend it.
I think I'm a firm believer that regardless of what we do in the workplace, if we're parents, the greatest work that'll have the greatest impact will actually be the work that we do within the walls of our own home, because we can, as you mentioned, we can have such an impact there. And I think, unfortunately, and I fall, not victim to that. I fall, to this bad habit as well, is that sometimes we let media, even if it's good media, be a driving force in our kids' life, as opposed to having the conversations that you just had, which is teaching them the principles that we're learning, right? If they're people wired like you and like me, like, we're surrounding ourselves with personal development, with mentors. And what a great way at a very early age, just like we know that it's easy to teach a child a foreign language at a young age, it's easier to teach them these great practices at a young age. And rather than letting the Disney Channel or whatever, no offense, because I know you've got a background there, that there's such a greater impact that we can have on our children's lives by just being intentional and teaching them principles from the one thing, right? And other great sources.
Well, here's another example: accountability. When I look at what my standards are in business with the people who work with me, showing up as an accountable person is huge. If you show up and point the finger before you look in the mirror, we're not going to win together. And for me, my daughter, at age 5, I taught her that accountability means that when something doesn't go your way, you ask, what can I do better? And I remember so vividly the first time when something happened and she was crying and she came up to me because she did something that was, let's just say, we wish she had chosen different actions. And she's crying, and instead of screaming at us, she goes, "Daddy, what can I do better?" And I just I got out on my knees and I hugged her. It's like, oh my gosh, if you can get this at this age, what happens over the course of a lifetime?
Yeah, what a different mentality than many, right? Which is, it's everyone else's problem, right?
Yep.
It's everyone else's problem. Never me.
If you ask her, until your number one priority is done, Daphne, what is everything else? And she goes, a distraction, Dad.
Oh, I'd love to be a fly on the wall. And you've given me the opportunity to be a fly on the wall in the Woods home. How awesome. Jumping back to kind of the business side of it, obviously, for those that haven't read The One Thing, go find the book, please. In fact, I'm even going to give you a kind of a jump start on that. That if you go to theonething.com/training, if you have read the book and you feel like, which I know for a lot of people, it's like, I love the content of the book, but then I look at my emails, but then I look at my voicemails, and it's hard to put this into practice, right? What Geoff, together with his partner Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, have done, have really taken the principles of this book and turned it into an ongoing curriculum, like an ongoing almost workshop, right? Where you're living it. You're not perfect. You're not saying I've got it. I've even watched numerous webinars where you're saying, look, and I didn't do my one thing here, and I'm not on track for this, and here's how I'm going to fix that, right? I think a lot of people are like, it's either I'm all in and I'm totally successful and I got it, or I can't do it at all.
No. And that's one of the 3 commitments you make when you want to live a life of extraordinary results, is following this path of mastery. And so many people, when we think of mastery, we view it as a destination we arrive at. But in the book, they say the moment you start to view mastery as a path you go down, rather than a destination you arrive at, it starts to feel achievable and attainable. It's actually not about arriving. It's about who you become along the way. And every single one of us, we manufacture this idea of what perfection or success looks like. And it's irrelevant. It's about, how are you behaving today? Who's the person you can become today? And how do you become a better version tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and just get better over time?
It really takes the mystery out of growth, doesn't it? Is it like sometimes we overcomplicate it, and we think that, those people are successful because their DNA, they're wired differently. They're not like me. They don't have the same weaknesses as I. And we almost put like the path of mastery on a pedestal, not just the people, but the path to where like we never even actually set foot on it, because it's, it's too far out of reach. So I love what you said there, is that it's actually like those that are the most successful, right? The people you get to hang around, right? Are people who recognize the fact that, look, I screw up every day, but I just stay on this path. And I know that being on the path is what's going to get me there.
That's right.
I would love to have, I've got some people watching live. If you have questions for Geoff that you'd like to bring up, well, here, please do so. Would love to engage the audience in this. So Geoff, talk to us a little bit about what you see as if you're a real estate agent. Again, this audience is mostly real estate professionals.
Sure.
What do you see as the one thing that real estate agents need to be doing in order to really give them the most amount of options and the most amount of power over their own schedule
Sure.
and life?
Yeah, great question. And Dennis, thank you very much. We've got some basics courses on that training page that he's choosing to take advantage of. So thanks, man. I appreciate it. Here's what's interesting about real estate, especially if you're in production. Your one thing is pretty well defined. What is it?
Generate business, right?
Lead generation, right? If we walked downstairs and went into Gary Keller's office together, I would walk you over to a coffee table he has in front of his couch, and on it would be a sheet of paper that has been there for years. And it's just blank sheet of paper with written in Sharpie, until my number one priority is done. Everything else is a distraction. The real estate business is actually very simple. Lead generate. Yeah. Everything else is everything else. And I think what we see, the agents who are most successful make a habit out of lead generation. The challenge is people think big and they act big. What I mean by that is they think big about being the type of person who lead generates every day and has all these leads and builds this big business. And they tell themselves the story that they have to lead gen 3-4 hours a day and crush every distraction that pops up and threatens their focus. And when you set that as the bar of success, if you only lead generated for 2 hours, how do you feel?
Not bad, right?
Like a failure. And if the next day you do 2.5 hours, but the goal was 3 or 4, how do you feel?
Yeah, not good.
Not good. And what we now know from working with tens of thousands of people is that people will only allow themselves to feel like a failure for so long before they rewrite the rules of the game or they quit. In the one thing Gary and Jay talk about, it's not about thinking big and acting big. It's about thinking big and going small, based on a vision of being the type of person who lead gens 3-4 hours a day as a habit and crushes every distraction. How do we whittle it all the way back down to the lead domino, that 2-inch little domino that with the flick of a finger, effortlessly, it would fall? Yet it's so powerful, and because your dominoes are lined up, it truly makes everything else easier or unnecessary. So this is when we could put on our coaching hats and ask, well, what's the one thing I can do? Such that by doing it would make becoming that type of a person easier or unnecessary. Well, I have to lead gen more. Well, what's the one thing you can do to lead gen more? I'd have to make calls for at least an hour a day. Okay, well, what's the one thing you can do to make making an hour of phone calls a day easier or unnecessary? I'd have to make 1 phone call before I check my email. Boom. There it is. That's a lead domino. Now, what most people do is when they isolate their one thing, which it's a lead domino when it's that easy, like that flick of a finger, it's that small, we discount it because it feels too small. It almost feels like it's cheating. Yet this is where we have to trust the domino effect. We have to trust that if we just knock that lead domino down, that over time, extraordinary results become possible. Now, you watched me go from a really big idea and whittle it down to a lead domino. Now I'm going to reverse engineer it. I'm going to flip it. Justin, if you became the type of person who every day made 1 phone call before you checked your email, do you think you'd be more or less likely to make a second?
Yeah. The first one's the hardest, isn't it? I mean, that the first one, because the first one comes with not just the conversation, it comes with all the nonsense that we tell ourselves about what phone calls are about, right?
Yep.
And like that first one is like weighs 5,000 pounds. The next one weighs like 5 pounds.
So if you lifted that 5,000 pound first call and you made that call, what would you be more or less likely to do when you hung up?
That was fun. Like that wasn't so bad, right?
So what would you do next?
I'd make another one.
You'd make another one. And then what would you be more or less likely to do?
Make another one.
Right. So while the mark of success is one phone call a day is probably not going to lead to you building an extraordinary business. What it's about is that initial trigger that if you make a habit out of making a call before you check your email, accomplishing your priority before you check everyone else's, which is exactly what your inbox is, you're more likely to make more calls. All of a sudden, you're lead generating 15 minutes before you check your email. And then suddenly you're lead generating a half hour. Suddenly it's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Over time, you become the type of person who a meaningful portion of their day is spent generating leads for the business and treating everything else like a distraction.
Think big, act
Go
small.
small.
It's interesting, for real estate agents, I agree with you. Every problem, if you whittled it down to they're working with bad clients, or there's money challenges, or they don't have the right even leverage your team, oftentimes that's because they don't have the resources to do it. It means that it all comes down to, do I have enough business? Am I doing enough business to give myself options?
Yep. That's right. I forget who said it, but they said revenue cures all problems.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't have leverage, then you need to lead generate to earn the right to bring in leverage.
And I think too often agents look at their commission checks as a paycheck, as opposed to treating it like a business. So they think, I've made $300,000 this year. Like, we can live pretty well. What they haven't taken into account is actually following something, a proven model like the Millionaire Real Estate Agent that says, okay, that's revenue. Income from that is going to come out of that, right? And so this ability to be able to say, I actually need to, if this is what I want to live on, then I need to actually be generating revenue up here, which gives me the space to be able to market, gives me the space to be able to hire leverage, gives me the ability to actually run a business, not just treat a business like a job, which doesn't work.
So I was in a mastermind with Gary Keller, and he was talking to the top agents in the world. And I remember he said that one of the biggest mistakes that agents have is they allow their lifestyle to rise as their income rises. And ultimately, they're unwilling to take a step back in lifestyle to build the business that they want to build. And here's a perfect example of this. So my other partner, Jay Papazan, his wife, Wendy, went out to lunch with another agent here locally in Austin. And he picked Wendy up, and they were driving to the restaurant, and he was complaining about how he really needed to hire a great operations person for his business. And Wendy said, well, how much do you think that person would cost? And he said, how much? And he's like, I don't have it in the budget. I can't afford it. And Wendy said, sure you do. And he goes, what are you talking about? Like, this is what my profit is and blah, blah, blah. She goes, no, you don't get it. You're actually driving your assistant right now. He was driving a brand new luxury vehicle.
Yeah.
He just prioritized having a nicer car than bringing leverage into his business. Mm-hmm. Yet if we look at probably the wealthiest person that we know, Gary Keller, homie drove a Ford Taurus for a very long time, long after he was Gary Keller. And it got to the point that the board one day went to him and said, Gary, you can't show up to the airport and pick recruits up in this beat up Taurus. You have to go buy a nicer car. And he said, I refuse to. And the company bought him a car.
I was going to say that, like, we just have a company car now. Gary, we took your car to the car wash and it's never coming back.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I look at Jay and Wendy, and like, I'm not going to dive into the details of their wealth or anything like that, but Jay's driving a car that he's had for over 10 years. I mean, it's just, when you start to surround yourself with people who truly are wealthy, you don't usually know it by what the way that they look.
It's the classic, The Millionaire Next Door classic book.
Absolutely.
Do you want wealth, or do you want to have the appearance of wealth? Because oftentimes
That's right.
you get both, right?
Yep. When I moved to Austin, Jay told me, he goes, we're going to coach you to be a millionaire. I said, awesome. He said, so now I needed to get a car. He said, I want you to go and buy a $1,500 beater and call it your millionaire mobile. Pay cash and just save it up. Yeah. I didn't go quite that bad, but
like, hey, just be ready. I might need you to come pick me up if that thing gets
That's right.
the road. Such great stuff, Geoff. Again, I want to thank you for your time. I always end. This is a signature question. In fact, let me just, before I get to that, I've got one more comment here from Dennis. He said, the book, again, speaking of the one thing, changed my life. I've actually lost my job, non-real estate, but I'm using the one thing to generate leads for job search. Day one yesterday, 5 awesome leads.
So Dennis, I'm curious, if you had to describe the 2 to 3 things you do exceptionally well, what would they be? Put that in the comments. And there's a lesson in this for the people who are listening. Oftentimes when we as business owners are looking to bring somebody on and we create a job description and we think of all the things this person has to do for their job, and we would flip that on its head. We ask the question, what are the 2 to 3 things somebody has to do exceptionally well? Otherwise, they're fired. So when Gary and Jay wrote the job description for my job, they said the 2 to 3 things: I had to be able to cast a vision, because if Gary and Jay had to do the thinking for me, I'm fired. I had to be able to drive revenue, meaning I had to be able to show them I could create $100,000 out of thin air in 90 days or less, or I was fired. And I had to prove that I could recruit and retain talent. Otherwise, I was fired. Those were the 3 things they were hunting for. And then I had to demonstrate it in the first 30, 60, 90 days. So Dennis, the reason I'm asking is if you can get really clear on where your strengths are, think less about the position and think more about what are the things you do exceptionally well. So I'm seeing time blocked and ignoring distractions, lead generate. Super interesting. I don't know, Dennis, we're hiring.
Dennis is actually a good friend of mine, really brilliant guy. Has worked for some of the largest software companies in the world. Kind of their key strategy sales guy. So anyway, his company actually just sold their closed their North American operations. So yeah, great guy to.
So you got his contact info?
I do. Be happy to.
All right, make an email intro.
Yeah, we'll do. So back to the signature question, Geoff. You're obviously.
Hold on. Can I pause real quick? Can I pause? This comes back to the mentor-mentee conversation. Yeah. So often we're in a position in our life where that we know that we want something and we're not sure how to get it. Yeah. And the lead domino is just talking about it. I mean, especially when people say, like, how do I find a mentor? Well, can you describe in one sentence the type of person you're looking to meet? Oh, I'm looking to meet somebody who has scaled a technology company. And instead of asking people, when people ask you what's new, what's going on, what's up, and saying nothing, you say, I've gotten a lot of clarity that I'm looking for my next opportunity right now. And I happen to love lead generating and scaling businesses. And zip your mouth. And you would be shocked. Like yesterday was day 1 of him looking for his new job. The fact that he just put it in the chat box, he didn't know that we're hiring.
Yeah. Interesting.
Put it out there, baby. Put it out there.
One of the things that I've appreciated by being a part of the Living Your One Thing community is that it's not just about that one question, right? Like before that, there's some work ahead of time to really be able to identify, and gain clarity. And what I hear you saying, Geoff, is like the one thing that it is foundational for a lot of this. Just like for you, when your coworker had a stroke and you lost 40% of your income, there was clarity of this no longer works for me. And it's clear that I need to be somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to same question you posed to Dennis, or that you pointed out, right? That Dennis is saying is he's clear on what he's looking for, because you can't speak it until it's clear in your head. And it's almost going through that exercise. Talk to me quickly about what the Living the One Thing community does to help people with that.
So ultimately, the book went out and is now one of the highest rated business books of all time. And the reason that I have a job and started this company is we wanted to turn the book into a movement that would help people live the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. And there were some things that when we engaged with the people who were fans of the book and tried to figure out what their pain points were, they said they were lacking 3 things. And these are the 3 things that everybody is lacking if they're not achieving extraordinary. And first is clarity. Most people are lacking clarity on what their goals are or the exact plan or how to behave appropriately in the moment. They're then lacking control. We feel like we lack control of our time. And finally, we are lacking a community. We're lacking a community that actually has a relationship with their goals, that has a culture of accountability, that can support us when we're talking the language of the one thing. And so we asked, what's the one thing we can do such that by doing it would make giving people clarity, control, and community easier or unnecessary? And the answer was what we call living your one thing. It's a community. We've got about 1,000 people that are high achievers that are committed to collaborating and having a true relationship with their goals, all based on the models of the one thing. And so that link that you put up there, theonething.com/training, at the top, you'll see two buttons, like a red that says sign in, and there's a gray one that says learn more. Just click the learn more, or you can go to theonething.com/learn more.
Well, and what you guys have done with the community is it's so reachable, right? It's not like it's $1,000 a month or $2,000 or $5,000 a month product, right? Or a one-time product, but it's really something that really is attainable for anybody and everybody that's serious about this. And I love that about what you've done. Is that it's really about creating a movement, at scale.
Yep. And you nailed it.
Back to the signature question. We are having so much fun together. We're not quite getting to the end, which is okay. There's such value. So I again want to thank you for your time. This is such a treat for all of us. So share with me, Geoff. You're obviously a big thinker. What is it that you do on a regular basis to continue to be that way, to expand your own possibilities to where Geoff Woods's trajectory doesn't start to flatten out, but it continues to, your vision continues to expand? Because that's one thing that they hired you for, right? Gary Keller, billionaire, right? I would say one of the foremost leader in the real estate industry right now, right? You report directly to him. You're partner with him in this. You've got some really bright people around you. They hired you because you needed to create a vision. So you're obviously a big thinker. What do you do to continue to be that way?
So episode 143 and 144 of the One Thing podcast is titled "The Habit That Cost $100 Million to Learn and Why It Was Worth It," part 1 and 2.
Such a good hook. I love it.
I interviewed a guy named Keith Cunningham who literally lost $100 million. And out of that loss, he formed one habit. And that one habit, he said, gave him an incredible ROI because he made back way more than that. And that habit is the habit of thinking time. I went on a 66-day challenge where every day I would sit down with a pen, a paper, and a great question. We call them productive questions. A question that is so big that the immediate answer, it stops you dead in your tracks and you go, huh, great question. Like, here's an example. Justin, what's the one thing you're not currently doing that if you started doing it immediately, you'd 5x your business in the next 12 months?
This is a question to me. This isn't just hypothetical. It's speaking in front of large audiences. Okay.
But that's a question that's really, it's not like, what's on your plate today? What do you have to do today?
What's on your
emails do you have? Right. If my business could talk, what would it say about me? What assumptions am I currently making that may not be true? Right. So I went on this 66-day challenge of doing this every day. And I don't do it every day anymore, but I have a regular rhythm of multiple times a week. I have a time block for thinking, to sit down. My computer is shut down, email is shut down, phone is on do not disturb. I tell my team that for the next hour or however long that is, that I'm going to be in a time block, which that they inherently understand what that means.
Your team better get that.
Yeah, there's a common language there. They understand that time block means don't mess with me. And I ask a great question and I search for the answer. So often we are so busy running and taking action in our business. But Keith would say there's nothing worse than running enthusiastically in the wrong direction. And if you are not the type of person who regularly has time blocked to reflect and plan, how do you know if you're running in the right direction? It's why when we designed the One Thing Planner, after every single month, after every quarter, we have reflect-in plans. These are great coaching questions that force you to reflect back, gain perspective, and based on this, put a plan in place.
One one of my mentors is Chris Suarez, who you probably
Oh,
know.
yeah.
So I took a course from Chris recently called Become the CEO. And he talked about the last session of his course was about how the top CEOs have white space.
Oh, yeah.
It's not how much can they pack in, but like even Bill Gates would take weeks off at a time, not to necessarily vacation. I'm sure he probably did that as well, but where it was just time where he would go and read and think. That's powerful, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just pulled up my calendar for my digital calendar for the week. I mean, even today, I've got 3 hours out of an 8-hour day that is just mine. That's mine. And that's when I get to show up. And if the one thing in that moment is thinking time, or if it's lead gen, or if doesn't matter.
Similar to how some people, how all of us, when there's silence, we get uncomfortable, especially those of us in sales type roles, right? When there's silence, we tend to want to fill it really quickly. And I feel like a similar philosophy happens, or practice happens, when it comes to white space on our calendar, is we habitually go to email and we're checking that thing as if it's like, I hit a crack or something. Like it's crazy how we have to fill that time. We're really uncomfortable not doing anything. And we fill it with oftentimes, and I've, like, when I've followed my time blocks, I can check my email and get through my emails in probably 30 minutes total, 2 sessions of maybe 15 to 30 minutes each, and I'm done. Or it can take me all day. And if I don't have my time block properly followed, those same amounts of email, curiously enough, take the same amount of time. I don't understand how it happens, but it happens.
Oh, yeah.
And so not having that white space and protecting it and being okay with it being white space and being okay with it being thinking time is such a powerful practice, Geoff.
So can I tell a cool story about why we manage time the way we manage time?
I'd love to hear it.
So when we were getting ready to create the One Thing Planner, I had one of our researchers, her name's Madeleine. I gave her a very small task. I said, Madeleine, go research the entire history of time. And she looked at me and said, are you for real? And I said, yeah. And I said, go put a binder together. And she went and she did the research, and she came back and she presented me with something that was a great story. She goes, when we look back to like ancient man, there was day and there was night. Like that was our concept of time. There was day, there was night. That was it. And as we progressed as a species, we began to notice that in certain types of year, there were animals that showed up that could be hunted, and there were crops that we could grow. And we developed this idea of seasons. And that's all we had. We had day, we had night, and we had seasons. Yet we knew so little about who we were and what this world was, and we felt this desire to know more. So we went smaller, and we began to notice that every 30 days or so, the moon would wax and wane, and we came up with this idea of months. So we had day, we had night, we had seasons, we had months, and yet we knew so little about ourselves and the world, so we felt the need to go smaller. And then you start going to ancient Babylonians, Greeks, Egyptians, Romans. They started to use something called a sexagesimal system, which means units of 60. It's why there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. And you just keep seeing this progression of knowing so little about us and the world, and this need to go smaller, to the point where you fast forward to today. When we look at our time, we're looking like our digital calendar, we're looking at our time in 15, 30, 1 hour increments. So here's the question. If we used the models and systems of ancient Babylonians, Greeks, Egyptians, Romans to manage our time today, what does how they live back then have to do with how we live our lives today? The answer is nothing. Yet we use their systems. And it's why we feel more out of control than ever before, because it's a different world. And part of this was pressing reset and saying, how do we help people have a bigger view of time? Gary says, if you want to achieve big things, you need a bigger view of time. And a digital calendar doesn't give it to you. I guarantee not a single person here, if we had you open up your digital calendar, switch to the monthly view and say, tell us the most important thing on your calendar for the month, not a single one of you could tell us.
Yeah.
It's why the CEO of our tech company in Keller Williams uses a paper planner.
Hmm.
That's why we created the One Thing Planner.
You can see it's all right there in front of you.
So the action that I would suggest is if you are not using a paper planner, like I use my One Thing Planner and I use a digital calendar, but your digital calendar was designed to capture meetings with other people. It was designed to capture everything. It's why people open up their calendars, they see all the stuff that's scheduled, and they fill everything else in the time that remains. It's why we have no white space. Versus starting with a blank slate like a paper planner, putting the handful of major priorities that matter most, your time off, your one thing, your planning time, and everything else is a distraction. Place the big boulders in the stream so that everything else, that when the water hits it, what does it do?
Goes around it.
It goes around it. Then you open up your digital calendar and you clearly see, hey, my One Thing Planner says I'm supposed to be lead generating today, but I see that I've got all these appointments that are, or all these things that are scheduled. And all of a sudden you're getting to look at them for what they are. Distractions. Yeah. And you act accordingly.
Water that needs to move around it.
Bingo.
Good stuff, man. Again, I want to encourage anybody who doesn't follow Geoff or hasn't gone to the One Thing community, living your one thing, please do so. Do yourself a favor, again, for the value that he's providing. This kind of value that he's been so generous to pour into this audience is readily available. And there's so much there, but it's in a format that allows you to be on the path of mastery. And I'll be a kind of a personal witness to the value that's there. So Geoff, thank you again so much. This has been, again, such a treat for me and for my audience. I want to thank you for being a big thinker and someone who's encouraging and modeling how to act small, so where we can actually apply the big visions that all of us want to live out. So
awesome, Justin. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. This has been valuable. Do me a favor and share this out. Tag somebody who needs to hear this message, somebody who you feel like their greatness is held up because they're taking on too much and don't have a proper model in place to help them get to that next level. So thanks again, Geoff, and thanks everybody. We'll catch you.